I'm very honoured to, I'm delighted and very honoured, sorry, to introduce our guest today, Tanya Bearup. Tanya, it's lovely to have you here, and we've been having a lovely morning touring some therapeutic gardens here in Perth, so it's been terrific. So I'll just tell you a little bit about Tanya. Tanya is the Vice President of Therapeutic Horticulture Australia, and she's also a social worker and a horticultural therapist, and the founder of My Garden Space, which is a social and therapeutic gardening service based in Melbourne, Australia. Tanya's got 25 years' experience of aged care, disability, youth and family services. She's also a qualified horticulturalist and has combined her professions to provide engaging and purposeful evidence-based counselling and therapeutic services for individuals and groups, utilising gardening and outdoor nature-based activities. Tanya's passion is gardening and creating nurturing green spaces with others and drawing the attention of her fellow gardeners to the restorative benefits of nature. Tanya is a member of the Australian Association of Social Workers, and she's been an active member on the National Committee of Therapeutic Horticulture Australia since 2021. So, Tanya, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Thank you everyone that's here today online as well. Yes, I have actually fallen in love with Scotland in the last 3 days. I'm so excited to have travelled up here. This place is absolutely beautiful. Absolutely enjoyed my train journey up here today as well, coming up through somewhere and around, I think over St Andrews, is that right? Like through fires, and anyway. So, but thank you, and obviously all the people that I've met here are so wonderful. You're all very cheery lot. Is that most Scottish people? Are you generally a happy bunch? No, okay, well. I have a new stereotype and it's quite lovely. So yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for the introduction as well, Jenny. Yeah, look, a little bit about myself. So yes, I am, as Jenny described, I do what I consider as horticultural therapy, combining my social work background with my horticulture and work with people in the garden spaces. While I've been in the UK, I've been here altogether for this is my second week, and visited quite a number of therapeutic horticulture programs throughout. Everybody caters differently. And I think that's kind of the scope of therapeutic horticulture. We cater to all different people right across the lifespan. And really in the same way we address mental health for people on that kind of spectrum. There's your day-to-day gardening that people can incorporate for, their well-being and restorative effects. But, I know that there's a group here from the organic gardeners. Is it Organic Gardeners Perth? Yeah. Yeah, so, and you can see, okay, very good. And, there's those social and therapeutic benefits of just being together and gardening and being a part of an organisation as well, through to more intense therapeutic horticulture. So for myself, I started practising 4 years ago. We all remember what COVID was like. In Melbourne, we actually had one of the longest COVID lockdowns in the world. You might recall that. We weren't the longest, but we had a fair amount of it, about 250 days, I think. And during that time, we were allowed outside for the hour to go walking with people, with one other person. One of the people I walked with was a friend of mine who was a horticulturist. Now, at the time, I had been working in a very intense area of social work. I'd been doing that for 20 years. So working with entrenched mental health, some substance misuse, family violence, things quite intense like that. And I was finding myself a little bit worn out. And it was really part of, I understand it was called the Great Resignation, when lots of people had career changes. I also happened to have a significant birthday at the same time that normally sees people buying sports cars, and I bought myself a ute. For those who don't know what that is, the pickup trucks or whatever. What do you call them here? Yeah, pickup trucks. Okay, no, they're called utes. My granddad was very upset when I first played that in Scrabble, because there's no such thing as a ute, but yes, there is a ute. So that was part of what I did. Basically, I took that change when my girlfriend was talking to me about that. Something I always loved was gardening, and particularly gardening with people, because of the energy that's created when you're gardening with somebody else is actually something that's quite inspiring and actually creates its own energy. So that basically I decided to go down that field, realising that there was actually a thing called therapeutic horticulture. So there was a way I could combine both. I went on to do some training, the Introduction to Therapeutic Horticulture course down in Melbourne. At the same time, I then went on to study horticulture as well. For some reason, I don't know, in quick succession, basically I came up with the business name, My Garden Space, with that concept of creating a space where people can feel safe, where they can experience some restorative benefits and well-being, but also that concept of you can garden in whatever space you have, literally, whether it's in a teacup, gardening in a teacup. That's one of my favorite activities to do, is create, doing teacup gardens, or whether it is out in the community in a big plot or allotment. So now my client group now is basically ranges from 5 through to 90. I work right across the spectrum. I haven't actually started specialising in anything yet, but I think what that has done for me, and it's valuable to my role in THA, is that it's enabled me to see how just gardening and gardening with somebody can benefit people right across. So I work a day a week in a school with children who are autistic, some with other neurodivergent challenges, others with emotional issues. I also work with people with learning disabilities, others who have chronic mental health, and I go into their homes and garden with them one-to-one, as well as people, older Australians, and those with dementia too. So I'll give some examples of some of the work that I've done. But today, one of the things I'm first going to do is talk to you in the scope of my role as Vice President of Therapeutic Horticulture Australia. Just give you a little snapshot of the kind of stuff we do to support mental health through gardening. Let me just make sure I've got that. No, it's not. Oh yeah, it's not moving. Come on, Universal. Oh, just got to use that. Okay, that's good. That's part of. I skipped ahead anyway. That's some pictures of what I do. In case you want to see some pictures. I actually realised when I put this together. Well, not when I put it together, but when I was preparing for this, that I actually have a lot of women that I'm actually gardening with there, when actually I work with a lot of men or boys too. So yeah, it's not quite an accurate picture, but it just gives you a flavour. And you can see down there my little garden in a teacup. I just love that. It's one of the first therapeutic horticulture activities I did during COVID. But watching a video and that sounds like a good idea. So here is role of therapeutic horticulture in Australia. So as part of my role, it's all about advocating and raising awareness for the benefits. It's very similar to what Trellis do. We also want to create a network of people like myself or other, like the different organisations we've visited, to come together and kind of share information and support each other. I think as a sole trader for myself, it can be quite isolating at times, and that's one thing I do miss about working in an organisation, is that you often have the opportunity to debrief with people. Becoming a part of Therapeutic Horticulture Australia was one of the first things I did when I started practicing, because it was a way of getting some peer support around me. One of the other things I do is support running events and being on that subcommittee, and there's a great team of people that I work with there, and have met different members as a result of that involvement. It's been fantastic. It's just all that informal support. Of course, THA now, we've developed a peer support network as well, so we actually facilitate that very constructive engagement, which I know that Trellis do as well. So, and in terms of therapeutic, oh sorry, I've gone out, I was trying to look at my note. In terms of therapeutic horticulture for mental health, as I expressed before, I see that it is something that goes right across right across the spectrum. So you've got your social organisations, you've got your individuals. It's about encouraging people to garden for well-being as a form of prevention. We don't want to just be focusing on people that need therapy or a deficiency model. We all need to engage in nature and gardening for mental health. Something we're doing with THA is we've aligned ourselves with an organisation called Beyond Blue to present at the Melbourne International Flower and Garden Show, which is Australia's little equivalent to the Chelsea Garden Show. It brings in about 100,000 people a year. So we started presenting there last year, running therapeutic gardening tours. So we took people around some of the show gardens, and we had different designers come and speak about the therapeutic benefits of their garden and the stories that were behind some of those gardens that they created. It was quite amazing, and the feedback we got was great. We also got your everyday gardeners, especially after COVID, that would come up to us and say, of course gardening is therapy, everybody knows that. But the reality is not everybody does know. And one of our roles is to help people understand and to tease out some of those, you know, what is it about gardening itself that makes us feel so good? So, yeah. And again, similar to the UK, we have different programs that help people one-on-one, right through to, you know, working in residential psychiatric units and things like that as well. We have, you know, a lot of gardens designed for hospitals. Does draw your attention that just putting a garden in place doesn't necessarily make it restorative or therapeutic. There is some thinking and some psychology and some learning around that too. And THA help to guide people in that way as well and provide those opportunities. So yeah, that's THA, or a little bit of THA, and it's in no way comprehensive. There's some great people doing great work. I will just mention one thing that we do have is the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which sets up people who have disabilities are able to access supports that they feel they would best benefit from. And in that way, some people can get either support workers or peer workers to come into the garden and do some gardening with them. As an allied health professional, I'm able to provide that sort of service as a therapy support, as a social worker. And that's kind of, you know, what I do. When I talked about that I did the Great Resignation back in COVID, what I realised now, the other language that was used, it was the Great Pivot. And that's much stronger. That's much more what I did. I didn't stop being a social worker. I just pivoted and now I provide it in a different way. So that's kind of what I bring to the space. So I will start off with the foundation. And I think, you know, one of the foundations to my love of gardening and drawing metaphors from the garden for growth. So I know Lindsay spoke a little bit about that before as well. And I love the fact that it's about the secret garden. So how many people here know about the secret garden and the story of it? Does anybody not know about it? No? Okay. Well, this is, and maybe, you know, being the UK, you might have more insight into it all. But I love the fact, one thing we don't have in Australia, we don't have walled gardens like this. Nor do we have robins. So imagine my delight when on my first morning of arriving in the UK, and there was a robin sitting on a walled garden fence. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm here to the secret garden. Anyhow, so, you know, if you think about the story of the secret garden, you basically have your three main characters. You've got Mary, who's the orphan with her trauma history. You've got Colin, who's the little fella that's got some of those you know, limited disabilities that's stuck in his mind with a lot of stuff. And then you've got Dickon, who is the lad from the land, you know, from the Yorkshire Dales. Also saw those on my way to Scotland, so I was also excited about that. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm in a coach travelling to to Craven Manor or whatever it was called. Anyhow, so Dickon to me in the story is basically the therapeutic horticulture practitioner. He's the guy that has all that knowledge, and he teaches Mary, who's a very sallow, poorly young girl when she arrives at the place, how to garden in this walled garden that has been locked up because of a trauma that, you know, an event that occurred there. And in the process of working in the garden, then she makes that connection with Colin, and the two of them come in together. They both grow and they bloom. And there's those, you know, those things about when she first comes in, and it might be the snowdrops or something, some kind of thing. I'm looking at you because you talk about how much you love snowdrops. Let's just pretend it's snowdrops because it suits this story quite well. We know when she starts clearing away the weeds to make room for the garden to grow, the flowers to grow. That's kind of like, you know, sort of metaphor for well-being. But sometimes we need to get rid of some of those thoughts that stop our growth and focus on the things that we want to grow and develop in our lives. And of course, the climax for me. So particularly, I was inspired by the Secret Garden story. It was this 1946 version of it that used to be televised on our equivalent of serialized on our equivalent of the BBC. And the last scene, of course, is when it all suddenly becomes Technicolor when you see the garden in all its glory. I am told that this is what gardens look like in the UK. Yeah. So, yeah, in the summertime. But I have lots of apologies from people about the gardens aren't what they want them to be at this stage. But that's life. Life has its seasons, doesn't it? And winter also has its purpose as well. So I expressed before. Well, I didn't express before. I forgot to to do that. You might have seen that the idea of this presentation is going to be talking about how we can use gardening as an opportunity for experiential learning, using a person-centered approach. So basically, experiential learning is helping people to not just learn with the head, but learn with the heart. And using a person-centered approach means that we adapt our gardening, as Lindsay expressed before. It's not, she might have an idea about how she wants to do things, but she's got other people that she works with, and she wants to show that she values what they have to contribute. So it's meeting people where they're at and trying to tease out their potential. And something that I've recently become more attuned to as well is just that profound use of metaphors and how much they can relate to our work in the garden, both for ourselves. So I am aware that I'm not just speaking to practitioners here. I'm speaking to gardeners as well as people that practice, as well as those who do therapy. And the idea is that this is actually applicable to all of us. So you can take some of these metaphors for yourself and be more mindful about how, how gardening is reflective of the growth that happens in your own life. How many of you here do actually are already aware of metaphors and stuff when it comes to the garden? Yeah. So it's, I don't think I feel like I'm in good company, right? It's just that I'm teasing this out a little bit. So this quote is based on Sue Stuart-Smith's book, comes from it. She talks a lot about the metaphorical way that we engage with the garden. She actually expresses, we cannot think in any sophisticated way without metaphors. And when we're talking about people with entrenched mental health or some significant mental health, she talks about the metaphorical level of meaning in a garden is also an important part of therapy. A garden offers a ready-made set of symbols which can be a psychological lifeline. And what I'm touching on now is talking a little bit about Carl Rogers. So Carl Rogers was basically the founder of the person-centered approach. Carl Rogers himself, much to my delight, when I met with my supervisor, he said, Carl Rogers was a gardener and he talks a lot about gardening in his book. So I started deep diving into a bit of Carl Rogers. A lot of the quotes that I talk about Carl Rogers is actually a free book on Kindle. I'm not sure if it's free in the UK, it's free in Australia, so you might have to pop over to us to get it. But anyhow, this is one of his quotes. He says, "And then I garden. My garden supplies the same intriguing question I have been trying to meet in all my professional life. What are the effective conditions for growth?" And he talks about the person-centered approach and the actualizing tendency, which is a really big phrase, right? And we're going to use some metaphors to help you understand what that is. He says that it's a basic trust. So the person-centered approach is a basic trust that there is in every organism. And he goes on to clarify. He goes, whether it's a bee or an earthworm, an oak tree or a flower, an ape or a human, so in every organism, there is an underlying flow of movement towards constructive fulfillment of its inherent possibilities. So we have this beautiful, picture of the sunflower seeds. In a seed has everything it needs to become a sunflower seed, for example. Has everything it needs to become a sunflower. What it needs is those conditions to help it to grow. Okay, so that's kind of what that is. A person-centered approach, we can liken that to when we're working with people, everybody is different. So we meet people where they're at and we value them for who they are and what they bring to the space, what strengths they bring and what they can contribute. So for example, with, so if you can't make a tomato seed a sunflower seed. You can't make a watermelon seed an orange seed. You've got to make, if you're trying to do that, you're going to be very frustrated. But if you can accept people as they are, then you're actually going to help them to reach the potential for who they are, not someone that you want them to become. It talks about, to elaborate on what the actualizing tendency is, it's an inbuilt movement towards growth and fulfillment. It's the innate drive of all organisms to grow and achieve their potential. And one thing that helped me to drive this home, this was a bit of an aha moment for me. So that's what experiential learning is. It's kind of when it's like, I get it. Okay, you've talked to me about theory, but now actually I'm really excited and I understand this concept. So for me, this experience was based on Carl's story of a potato, a sprouting potato that he had found in the larder at home. I don't know, most of you might be so organised, probably if you were in this garden you would be. You wouldn't be having any sprouting potatoes, not unintentionally, because you're so organised and you make sure you eat them in time. But for Carl, he remembers going into the larder and finding these potatoes that were sprouting. They were trying to be potato plants. They were trying to reach their potential, even though they didn't have the best conditions around to grow. And basically, that's what it is. It's like, as a potato wants to grow and become a potato plant, so does everybody. And so everyone has that innate drive. Everyone we come across, your friends, the people next door, the people that we work with, we all want to strive to be the best people that we can be. It's just that often we don't have those conditions in which to grow. So I thought, yeah, well, I can get that. So I thought, well, I'm not a very organised person. I'm not very domestic at times because I get very distracted. And I thought, I wonder what my potatoes are doing in my pantry. And much to my delight, I found it. Those shoots were so long I couldn't even get them into the picture. But I'm telling you, I was so excited by that. I've never been so excited at my lack of organisation. But what I could do, this is that example of experiential learning. The day, that I went to school the next day, I took that potato with me. I went and spoke to the kids about, do you know that you have potato power? And then I explained to them about how the potatoes also, they're this plant that wants to grow and reaches potential, but we need to put the right conditions in. And straight away, one of the kids, now he may not have taken that, he didn't exactly take it on as, oh, I have so much potential like a potato, but he wanted to know, what do I need to do to get this potato to reach its potential? What do I need to do to garden? So we've engaged them in interest in the garden space. And when it comes back to us supporting people, this is something that Carl said. He says, I love to create such an environment in which persons, groups, and even plants can grow. And that's something that we can all be for each other. We can be those people that we meet on the street that can show that kind of unconditional positive regard and value in a person and help to tease out who they are. And they can sense that when you're interested in somebody for who they are, not who you want them to be. People pick that up and they can rise to that. It can be like sun for them. So some of these practice principles of the person-centered approach in the garden. This is a story of one of the fellows I work with. We'll call him Vince. Vince had a form of dementia, which stopped him, prevented him from planning and implementing plans because he would forget about what it was that he was wanting to do. He loved his garden, loved gardening, but at the point that I met him, he was a quite low mood because his garden was completely overrun and it was disorganised. Because he would go out into the garden, he would forget what he was there for, or he'd forget what he was going to do, and he couldn't implement that and keep his garden, keep on top of that garden. Basically, it was about me coming alongside him, and his main interest, being of an Italian heritage, a proud Italian heritage, he loved growing his tomatoes. And he grew tomatoes in a way that I wouldn't grow tomatoes, right? He had a different way of doing things. I was going, this is how he harvested his seeds on pieces of envelopes. Anyway, but he picked those up and he created furrows for all those seedlings. I don't think I would have, had the seeds so close together, or the seed I would have been thinning out, but no, he wanted to do it that way. And look at this beautiful harvest. He was so proud to have photos taken of that. And that's basically, kind of that in a nutshell. It's tapping into what is of interest to them, teasing that out, not taking over, but really is coming alongside them and gardening with them through gentle prompting, help him to reach his potential, even in that state of mental health for him at that time. Another one of the, and this was something I learned about, and feel free to correct me because we're always learning as gardeners, are we not? But I discovered there was such a thing as this when I was searching this up, which is, I had one client we talked about earlier, the metaphors, and sometimes metaphors can be a bit of a lifeline, particularly when somebody's in a state of psychological stress. They can't really think through those concepts. That can be all too hard, but if you can show them an example of something that might reflect, it can assist them to sort of take that in a bit. one of my clients was feeling rather dejected and feeling like they just weren't making any progress in their lives. They felt like they were so behind everybody else. Nobody else was, everyone else was achieving things, and they were so slow to get things happening in their lives. They were very passionate about growing their garlic, and they had planted garlic, and they would look at this garlic shooting up. There was a whole lot that had grown up, and they were looking so fantastic. And then they were feeling really dejected because there was a whole lot that hadn't started coming yet. And that's what I've learned through this process, is that there are two different types of garlic. Garlic grows at different times, which we had talked about. They had planted two different types of garlic. And when the next lot of garlic started coming up and rising to the surface, I was able to point out to him that you might feel like you're not progressing in the way that you need to progress, but this is in actuality what is happening for you. There is growth coming about. It's just that we all grow at different rates. And it was almost like he just went, you could see just kind of that burden of expectation just lifting off him, just because we could point to that analogy in the garden. So I felt like that was quite good. And this is one of those other, like a transferable skill through gardening. One of my young people, something I do when I go out with the kids to get them attuned to the garden, we do a bit of mindfulness. We do the 5 senses grounding technique, the 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can hear, smells, yeah. 2 things you can touch, I'll say. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, you can look it up there. It's like, it works very well. The particular young girl that I worked with, she was really good at going into the school garden and just identifying the problems. But more than that, she was actually able to say, oh, we should do this or we should do that. Our garden shed, I would love to have taken photos of that. It was terrible. It was just a mess. But she came up with a whole idea, maybe like your person, she came up with a whole idea of how to make it better. And she had such a sense of pride when the greenhouse blew down at the school. She came up with a whole idea of creating a new greenhouse out of what was left out of the frame. It was really good, and we were able to show that to her family after she had done it. There was that sense of pride and accomplishment. What she was able to do with that was transfer it. She recognised, I am a good problem solver in the garden. The garden was her territory. It was able to build her confidence, but she could then translate that into the classroom where things were a bit tougher for her. And she'd be able to apply that I'm a good problem solver and approach her schoolwork in the same way she could approach tasks in the garden. And this is, again, Lindsay, it was great hearing you talk today. This is one of my favourite things to talk about. This, for me, epitomises what it's like to work in the garden, what it's like to work with people. You really have to be so flexible. I'm sure, and especially for people, it's the Northern Hemisphere we're in, isn't it? Yeah. You probably really have to be flexible when it comes to gardening, because the weather does what the weather wants to do. It still happens in Australia as well. I mean, we get, and I know that you get them too, but the extreme hot day, or if a person's not in the mood to do what what you had planned. So, I'm very envious of how you have this, because my school garden does not look like this. I'll say I only work there a day a week, so maybe that's why. But I can never get anything done the way that I want to get things done, because it's not about my agenda, it's about theirs, it's about their goals and what they want to achieve. So being reflexive and reflective, so that's talking about having a flexible approach. You might come with one idea in mind, but you might have to change it depending on the season, the mood, whatever else is going on. And also being reflective. And I say this because, just having some conversations about people using metaphors in the garden, they may not work for everybody. This is one way that you enhance the work that you do in the garden. It's a tool, but just to be thinking about, sometimes we can go back, and that's what I will do after a session. I'll sit down and reflect on what happened and what can be done, what worked and what could work better for next time. So yeah, that's my little takeaway. And obviously I like that slide, so I'm not literally that flexible at all. Wish I was. So yeah, I'll finish up with some further reading. As most of you have heard me talk about, this is about Sue Stuart-Smith's book, The Well-Gardened Mind. The reason why I point this out is because I think it is great for everybody, because if you want to learn more, it has all the theories behind why is gardening good for you, all the research around green space. Well, maybe not all of it, but enough. It certainly has enough. It has much more than I need in it. And she goes through in each book and talks about different ways that therapeutic horticulture or gardening has been used and why it's successful. So she talks, to finish off with this quote, she says, "The garden is perhaps the best metaphor we have for life, but it is also so much more." I didn't put the notes in here, so I might have to go off the top of my head. Darn it. She gave the story of Voltaire, who had the quote that we must cultivate our garden. Has anyone heard that? Seems like it. Anyway, but that's based on one of his books that talks about somebody who's experiencing just how life can be so hard, life and the reality of life, our world today, with climate change and things, we can feel so dejected. And we can be pondering that, we can be talking about that and the philosophical approaches, but at the end of the day, the joy comes from when we start interacting with people and when we start getting in contact with the earth. And one of the things that Voltaire said after he wrote that particular book, which had been banned, he went on and he acquired a plot of some acre, I'm not sure how big, an estate probably, because he planted thousands of trees, so I don't think it was an allotment. But he said that that planting a garden for him was one of the most meaningful things that he did, even beyond all the words of the scribes of England. Anyway, other people that might be, sorry, if you actually know that quote, I apologise, but it's basically, that's the gist of it. If you want to know more, you can read it. So yeah, so thank you for having me today. Really happy to take any questions. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tanya. That's marvellous. We're just going to stop sharing so we can see our audience online. Just do that. There we go. So, thanks very much, everybody. Does anybody have a question in the room? So, got anything? So, Tanya. Yes, Margaret.
Australia's
Yes. Yes.
So are there centres like states interactions of cultural?
Yeah. So the question, for those who couldn't hear that, was about Australia being a big place, which it is. It's much bigger than the UK. Like, UK fits into the part that I'm from, which is Victoria. So it's like, whoa. You're quite right. There's so in terms of the centre, if you're talking about Therapeutic Horticulture Australia specifically, that's what we are. We are national based and we aim to cater for everybody right across Australia. It's very true that we have so much seasonal, variation right across our soil. Most of it's really poor. The whole middle of Australia is just desert, and the challenge that comes working with that. So what we try and do for Therapeutic Horticulture Australia is get like satellite groups, or we call them meetup champions, so that when we do networks and face-to-face, because people really find the value of that, they can meet in regions. So we've gone from having a couple of meetups in, we started in Melbourne because that's where our highest membership is. Melbourne used to be known as the Garden State, so maybe it's natural that there's a high membership there, but we recognise the value of everybody all over. And so now we've actually moved to, we have 8 meetup champions, so representing different states throughout Australia, and looking forward to more of that growing, as well as creating opportunities for online networking as well. But there are many programs throughout Australia that cater for that. So when it comes to mental health, for example, I know there's a hospital up in Darwin that does, garden therapy, as well as places down in Melbourne and Sydney. I have. When I talked about that being reflexive and the flexible approach, yes, sometimes my kids, particularly the kids, they really challenge me. I've done my most growth with working with my students because they let you know what it's like. They won't muck about with that. And one of mine didn't particularly love the garden, but he loved to cook. So we would cook, but we would use what we could from the garden and bring that in. I mean, and obviously that's, one of the great things. With our friend Vince, he actually made me a beautiful pasta sauce with his tomatoes, so we could complete that process together too. Yeah.
Thank you, Tanya. Yeah, we have a question online from Lucy. Lucy Lou, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And I just want to ask you, you doing the business, do you really invite the people to come your garden, or you run the garden, or sometimes you talk about you provide one-to-one support. Do you go to the somebody else's garden to help them? That's
Yes,
my
no,
question.
thank you for clarifying. Sorry if I didn't mention that too much. Yes, I do. As I said, I go to a school a day a week, so I go there, which is great. But I do the one-to-one work. So I go to a lot of people and garden with them. When people talk about social and therapeutic horticulture, we need to realise that some people who are stuck at home for whatever reason, particularly when there's some mental health going on, they're not quite ready to take that step out into the community. And through my service, I can actually go to people's home and meet them where they're at, help to support their growth in the garden space, and then move them through into the community as well, help them to engage in gardens outside of the home.
I quite a little bit questions about this is therapeutical garden. I feel it's a different gardener. Normally, how long you working with them? And because it's quite really you offer 1 hour, or how much normally you charge? This is reasonable. How old normally they are, and then
Yeah, they're so I would normally say, so with the kids, it's about a 45-minute. I would say 45 minutes, and they're about done. Like sometimes I go, oh, I'll give you extra time in the garden, but they actually lose interest. So that works for them. Because I include a bit of talk therapy as a social worker, we do sit down and do some talking as well. But then we'll go out into the garden and provide those other benefits as well. So that's kind of the way that I do my work. For that reason, most of the people I work with, I would do about an hour and a half. So that allows for some talking time. Then it also allows us to go out in the garden and do some of that work too.
That's great. But that's the first time I heard talking about the Carl Roger. That's you bring that. This is the theory inside and combined. This is therapeutic horticulture.
Yes.
Actually, I like a little bit like counseling and combine this both, and then to really promote the personal growth. Is that what your intention? Yeah.
Yes, it is. That is certainly my intention. And that's why, there are, we didn't talk about it too much, but I would imagine that most people here would have heard of those two differences between horticultural therapy and therapeutic horticulture. I think really importantly, if you're going to be saying that you provide therapy, it's really good that you have that background in allied health and a profession that you're registered and qualified in that space to provide that sort of therapy. But the benefit is that then I can go and do the horticulture as well. The therapeutic aspect of horticulture. So people can do therapeutic horticulture, and there's so many people practicing and providing such a valuable input. But I guess what I provide is just that more intense work for people who need it in that way.
That's great. Thank you very much. That's really helpful.
Thanks.
Who else? Oh, this way.
I just want to tell you what this fund is. Obviously, from this.
Yeah.
But who funds?
Okay, so that was a question about where the funding source is. So as I mentioned before, there's the National Disability Insurance Scheme. It's by no means the best way of doing things, I have to say, and it's recently come under a lot of scrutiny about the way it's being utilised. That's why it's very important for me to demonstrate the evidence base for what I do, and also to express that I'm coming from a social work qualified allied health background in providing that. So that's one of the main ways. But I also get community organisations coming in. I've worked with previously homeless families and things funded by an organisation to come in and help people feel grounded to place and do some of that work with them as well. Private paying clients. And there's My Aged Care, which is another form of support that for people to help people stay at home. And that's, when I've done the dementia care, that's come through that funding. Correct, yes, yeah. I find it, for me, it's a little bit, if I can describe it, as agonising. Like at the school, for example, I have lots of kids that want to come and be part and spend special time with me in the garden. And because we know how beneficial that is for kids, and even if they might just have small things, you know, they don't need to be, you know, really breaking down, but just for that sense of well-being for themselves. I'd love to provide that, but it can be a bit limiting. Yeah. And I think that then I would have to spend time applying for grants and or aligning myself with another organisation in order to get that funding. It's something I'd love to do though. Yeah.
Do you get a lot of support from the, for example, the education system over there to encourage the children, not necessarily just children with maybe like the problem, but all children who, you know, it's what you were talking about, the difference in sort of gardens over here, I don't have a garden.
No.
You know, it's that ancient being. And obviously with the climate over here, people relish having a wall garden because you're getting a bit more extra heat and protection and stuff. But I'm sort of mixing all sorts of things here. But I mean, you know, the emphasis, I think, especially with the children, is to encourage them to really get going with trying to grow food in particular. And then realizing the importance of growing your own food from the health point of view and everything else that goes with it.
Yeah, there is. So in case you couldn't hear that, that was about asking what sort of programs we have in Australia to encourage children to get out and garden more. I imagine, and I think RHS do a bit of this too, don't they? They have, you know, school gardening programs, kitchen garden programs. So we have quite a few providers of that, in Australia as well. And schools are recognising that more and more. I think what we find is that people start off with good intentions and they forget that these gardens need to be maintained. And so you can have one person who's passionate and able to keep it going, but then, you know, it loses its momentum and you often go past schools that have had them and they're full of weeds. And but that's definitely it. And I think that your point about it is so important to encourage this younger generation to get out into the garden and get out into nature, because we know through research that people who have been exposed to the garden and nature as children, then, you know, when they get older, they use that as one of their ways to address well-being. Yeah.
We have a question online from Lynette. Lynette, if you're there, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question? Lynette.
Oh, you hear something.
Oh, Lynette, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, I'm in transit, so that's probably why you can't hear me. I want to know more about your virtual and online programs. How do you actually go about setting those up and running them?
So this is specifically, I was referring to the work with Therapeutic Horticulture Australia, that because we are a huge nation and we can't all come together, and we're run purely by volunteers as well. So it's all of us giving our time to create that space. We run some online Zoom sessions and meetings with people around Australia to do that. So not so much the therapeutic horticulture, though. You know, I certainly knew that garden in a teacup thing was a little exercise I did with somebody online, and other people in Australia also provided those services during COVID. Does that answer your question, Lynette?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. We've had a lovely comment from Anna. Anna says, a fascinating session, Tanya. I'm so glad you're enjoying Scotland. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Anna actually set up for me to go out and visit High Ground as well, which was just inspirational and fantastic. So thanks, Anna.
Is there anyone else with a question? Fiona.
Can I ask how doctors, general practitioners and other professionals see therapeutic horticulture, as far as you can tell?
Yeah.
Are they supportive? Are they broadly aware of it?
And now I wish I did brought another book with me. One of our people, Jubilee Williams, wrote a book called Nature Our Medicine, and she is a GP in Australia. So that's raising some awareness in the medical community. But thank you for raising that, because the other aspect, of course, and I know that you have it here, is the social green prescribing. So I know that that's something that's gaining a bit of traction. It hasn't quite gelled yet, but they are becoming more aware. And I think in the role of Therapeutic Horticulture Australia, we could do more to do that, to engage people. I have had referrals come from GPs and psychologists as well. But, you know, just because of my, you know, I guess I have a full quota, so I haven't needed to go and advocate more for myself, but probably a really valuable thing to do. Yeah.
And also, sorry, two other questions. I wanted to ask what you measure to build up your evidence base and show it to the disability communities, and they want to see what's their mind.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple of things that I do, and it's by no means well, firstly, I should say, when it comes to working with people through NDIS, I have an obligation to demonstrate therapeutic outcomes. So I will list, you know, we go through and work through the goals that have been established, and then work with them, again, using that person-centered approach. What is it that you want to achieve? So we list those, and then we talk about, well, how can gardening help to help you to meet those goals? So if it's like emotional regulation, there's lots of work in the garden that through, you know, the way that we use our body that actually helps to soothe and to calm us. So I can sort of demonstrate that, and then we reflect that, creating SMART goals and things. So it's more on a one-to-one basis. The other thing I do quite frequently is I will use, I created a smiley mood wheel, so that, you know, they can talk about how they feel at the beginning of the session and then how they feel at the end of the session. That can be helpful.
And you take photos of that, or is it one that you sort of capture it?
Well, in actual, so that the smiley mood wheel was one thing I used for my, you know, for my kids. And I actually take photos of them engaging in the garden, and I ask them, you know, what's something that you learned about yourself and something you learned about yourself in the garden. So they've got, and I create a journal for them. And I use the smiley mood wheel as a bit of a reflection as well. Yeah. But otherwise it's case notes and reports that I do. It's part of my work. And that's that social work background that, yeah. Yes, yeah. Yeah, I've actually 100%. I think that's when I saw most readily the need to have really informed design for people in the garden space, because I know they talk about universal accessibility. Sorry if I missed that. That was about working with people with physical disabilities. Yeah, and I'm just, yeah, you heard what I said in response to that, but it's, yeah, so I have worked with people with physical disabilities, and that's a huge learning for me too. Because you've really got to be mindful and think adaptable stuff. Recently with Therapeutic Horticulture Australia, we visited the Royal Talbot Rehabilitation Centre, and a really informed discussion with one of the facilitators there, Anton, and we all had a good play of all of his accessible gardening tools and things, which really helped. Yeah, so I think two things. A garden needs to be accessible. Of course, you can then do your tabletop gardening activities as well, so it doesn't need to be excluded. But I think to get the full thing, it's great to have that sort of collaborative discussion with people who are creating the garden spaces and then using adaptive tools. And yeah.
Is that Anton Harrington?
Yes.
Yeah, he was our seminar series. First seminar series presenter last year.
Oh, great.
So
yeah.
Nice video on the YouTube channel.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. Oh, good. Well, must watch that. Yeah.
Great. And that's one thing that THA in Australia is doing in a way that we haven't done so far here. Is really looking at the skills of a garden designer, you know, the landscape side of it, whereas so that's an important area of knowledge and skills, but focusing on educational qualifications and skills for practitioners. So activity program and so on, but we know that we give out advice about accessible design and adaptive tools and so on, but we haven't really had that same focus on accrediting the designer side.
Yes, yeah.
And that there's that role.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting.
Yeah. And did people hear? If I got a thumbs up from the audience, did you hear what Fiona had expressed there? Oh, good. All right, thank you.
Any more questions? We round up our session.
Esoteric question.
Esoteric question.
The idea that obviously to do the metaphor.
Yes.
And you did say, well, something quite intimate.
Yes. Yeah.
severe personality disorder.
Yeah.
They can't use that to represent things. So what do you think they do instead?
That is a good question. I'm not sure if I can answer that. Yeah, I don't think I could really answer what's going on there. Yeah, I think what I would just say is that that's where that adaptability comes in. So I know that some of the autistic kids I work with, you just need to be black and white and straightforward about what you're doing and not pull in so much of that. Yeah. But I still think, but I still have been able to draw some of that experiential learning in the garden still. So maybe not so much about metaphors, but during COVID, for example, one of my people developed quite a phobia about germs, which makes a lot of sense if you're thinking, you know, that it was very much reinforced. So they got to that point where they wanted to touch people, or they were washing their hands continuously, and it was developing as a compulsion. What I was able to teach them was to talk about good and bad germs, which is it's kind of hard, because to go, yes, some germs are harmful, and that's what we've been taught, but some germs are also really good for us, the microbiomes that we were speaking about before. So we're able to show him, we did some work where I got a really stinky tub of compost. Like, it really stunk, you know, when it goes off and it's just like, oh my gosh, I left that. But we tipped it into the garden and we let it do its thing, and you know, even the next day we could come back and that smell was gone, and we talked about how it, you know, and how the microbes and everything work together to create, you know, good soil and bring something good out of bad. So yeah, I would just talk about using an adaptable approach. But yeah, can't quite answer that. Maybe you could answer that for me.
Just thinking the things that you said.
Yeah.
Collaboration, about sitting alongside the person that you're working. And my particular interest is mentalising.
Right.
You know, something what's going on in the other person's mind. Yes. Which you do a lot, and Lindsay described as well.
Yeah.
What's working for this person, what's not working for this person. I suppose I'm just sort of saying, go for the mentalising.
Okay.
Rather than metaphor.
Oh, okay. Right, very good. Thank you.
We've got a comment from Lynn. She's saying clean language is useful for those where metaphors don't work.
Yeah.
She's added that to your
thank
description.
You. Thank you. Yeah.
We have a question here from someone.
I feel like I'm one of those UK quiz programs.
Just keeps popping up. We're just going to ask Holland to unmute. Hello.
Hello.
Hello there.
Hiya. I was just wanting to ask, because there's quite a lot of chat about young kids getting out in the garden and people with disability.
Yeah.
Why is there never anything focused on teenagers?
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, I wouldn't, yes. Yeah, that's true.
They feel like the forgotten youth, you know. I feel like they would really benefit from learning nature. And I always feel like when people talk about therapeutic horticulture, it's always young children or older people that have gotten back into nature. But why are we not filling that middle gap?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that middle gap is being filled. It's just not an area that I've had that honour of specialising in myself. So I'll say people are doing that, but you're right. I think, because there is an emphasis, isn't there, at schools, and even at schools, one of the programs that we have, it might cater for 1 or 2 grades, but it doesn't cater for right across. I know I've worked with pre-teens a lot into that transition, and I have been contacted by a secondary college about providing some services in the garden, and I agree. I think it would be absolutely fantastic. It really can help people to relate, and teenagers have so much creativity to offer as well.
Just getting them more connected, because a lot of people complain, teenagers vandalize and they go out and cause trouble, but giving them a sense of purpose outside would help that so much.
Yeah. And just to say that here in the garden, we just met with somebody who's specifically working with teenagers. Yeah.
Oh, incredible. That's amazing.
25, because they were exactly what you're saying, they were falling through the gaps in mental health. So
it's called Lost in Transition.
Lost in Transition, it's called.
Oh, perfect. I'll have a wee look for that, actually. That'd be great, because that's something I'm interested in sort of gearing towards.
Yeah. might want to reach out to Lindsay and ask some more questions.
Yeah. Sorry, I just thought it'd be a good room
No,
to
thank
sort
you,
of,
and
like,
thank you for
ask
pointing
that.
that out. Yeah, no, it's a really good point too. Yeah, so thank you.
Lovely. And can we just add, Pauline is saying that she works with 11 to 13-year-olds with ASD and ADHD.
Yep.
So Pauline's in the audience today too, so she was working with that age group.
Yep.
That was
Cool.
But time for one more question. Lucy, would you
Yeah,
like to?
just quickly, sorry. And actually, just get to that point as well. Engage. I noticed the engage learning disability, mental health, or maybe elderly people are very young. There's a gap there. But my daughter is 23 and she has autism, but she couldn't fit any like people with disability or autism group because she's overwhelmed being by them. So that's why I'm always interested in thinking about, is that possible to create a group from 18 to 30 years old? It's almost every group you go there, you can sense about the volunteer group, people older, or maybe they have disability, but neurodiversity, but do not really have a people who are like neurotypical, and then this kind of a group can exist. I don't know whether here the people want to create, because Scotland not far from Newcastle, or maybe thinking about the international trip. I don't know if anybody interested as working collaboratively to say how this work. That's my thought.
I think that's your key. I think working collaboratively is great. For myself as a social worker, part of that would be trying to find a group that your daughter could be a part of. So, you know, again, we've got the organic, you know, Perth organic farmers people, you know, you could reach out to them and go, you know, we've got this person, you know, how would you feel about coming alongside them? That could something that could be created. Yeah, if you don't have that resource yourself, reaching out in the community and meeting that gap could be something that would be valuable.
There's an example here, actually. The Edinburgh Botanic Gardens has a kind of gardening for wellbeing area, and they have different groups coming in. So there were a few years back when we had a young group of people with, you know, teenagers with various diverse disabilities coming along. So you know, somewhere that's already garden established is able to accept that group of work. So that's how these things come about. So,
yeah.
Okay. We've just got a contribution from Kath. She's saying she volunteers with a mixed adult group and that has autistic members at Southton Smallholding. So
that's right. Yeah, and they were working in some schools.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this more and more there seems to be a recognition in secondary schools or high schools here. It used to be a big focus in primary schools and nurseries, but we're getting to understand that, you know, for teenagers and older children.
Make it our mission.
So, well, thank you very much.
Okay,
thank you very much, Tanya, for giving us a wonderful presentation and answering all those questions for us.
Thank you for those who came along. I appreciate that.
Yes, and thank you very much to our audience here at the World Garden, and also to all of you who have joined us online. Thanks very much.